Good morning and welcome to the POLAREAN Imaging PLC interim results presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time by the Q&A tab situated in the right-hand corner of your screen. Just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all the questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I'd like to submit the following poll. I'd now like to hand you over to Chris Boniaco, CEO. Good morning to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, and thank you for taking the time to learn more about POLAREAN and our exciting technology and investment story today. It was said, my name is Chris Boniaco, and I joined the company as CEO this past June. I'm really excited to be part of the company and believe we have a significant opportunity ahead. The plan here is to present the company update and investment story in about 40 minutes or so, and then leave some time for Q&A. But before I begin, this is just a reminder of the normal disclaimers. So I think probably appropriate to give a full introduction about myself since I just started at the company roughly about 90 days ago. So I've been in the medtech space for about 30 years, and I've worked for a lot of smaller and larger companies. Some of the larger companies you can see here. Most of these larger companies that I worked for were because I sold a smaller company to the larger company. Predominantly, my entire career has been involved in the image guidance field, and this fits in very well to what I've been doing in selling a piece of capital equipment, but also single-use disposable equipment as well. I'll allow Chuck, our CFO, also to introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Chuck Osborne. I'm the CFO. I've been at POLAREAN for a little over 4 years. My background, I've spent about the last 25 years as CFO of various life science companies. During that time, done several M&As, took a couple of companies public on NASDAQ, and have done multiple corporate partnerships.
Great, thanks, Chuck. So a big decision point for me in coming to the company, there were a number of them, and I'll try to hit on those in the investment highlights. I typically look at coming into a new situation as similar to like an investor like yourself would look at it. But one of those really important factors for me was looking at the board, and we have a very significant board, experienced board, and it's really thrilled to work with each one of these. So here's just a list of the board members that you can see here. So just looking at the company at a glance, obviously we're a healthcare company. We're trying to really revolutionize the way MRI is being used, particularly in this case in the lungs. If you look at the right image over there, just in a nutshell, for those that are new to the story, if you take an MRI image of the chest area, the cavity, you'll actually see nothing in the lung. With our technology, we allow our customers to produce a specific gas that can be inhaled, and that actually lights up and is shown in MR. With our first indication, it allows us to see where all the gas, in other words, oxygen, is actually going within the lungs. So you see that in the top right area there. We then combined the area where you can see it in our technology with the original MRI, and you can see that on the bottom left. Then we use some sophisticated software that allows us to actually determine where the oxygen is getting in. In this case, we're looking at the xenon, our gas. But in this case, the xenon also goes in the same place as the air or the oxygen. And you can see there very easily on the image, the red area is the areas where it's not getting to. So it leads to some very exciting things. And I'll talk more about the technology in a minute. So just some multiple milestones that we've had since the beginning of this year and year to date. Obviously, most of you that are familiar with the story understand that we got FDA approval back in December of last year, and we started working on our commercialization process in January. We had some significant FDA regulatory process in this year. The first thing, of course, we received as part of this, our FDA approval was a 5-year exclusivity period for our drug, which is really great from an entrance standpoint, really allows others not to really think about this area as an opportunity for them in that first 5 years. We submitted our post-marketing requirement to expand our minimum age. Again, for those of you who follow the story, typically when you apply to the FDA for approval or a clearance, you're looking at ages between 18 and above. In this case, the FDA actually came to us and wanted more data to allow us to extend that minimum age from 18 down to 12, and they allowed us to do that. The next step was to bring that age even lower. So we fulfilled some post-marketing requirement plan to them, which will allow us to increase or decrease that minimum age from 12 down to 6, and we're looking forward to doing that by June of next year. We also received FDA clearance for a specific specialized Philips MRI coil. I'll talk about Philips in a little bit when we talk about the partnerships, but that was very significant for us. And then just recently, we were granted a meeting from the FDA, which will come and happen this October. It's called a formal Type B meeting, which will allow us to review our next FDA process, which is for what we call gas exchange. And I'll talk a little bit about gas exchange in a little bit. Also with gas exchange, we're looking at viewing microvascular hemodynamics as well. So that meeting will be coming up in October as well. And then a very significant milestone that we hit just a few weeks ago. First, we got the code, and I'll go more into depth on this. We got the code for allowing us to, for the code for our customers for reimbursement. And there's a couple steps in there, and I'll go through that quite specifically. But the nice thing is the code came in at roughly between $1,200 to $1,300 US dollars. So the collaboration that we signed in June with Philips got announced. There's really two parts to that structure. The first part of that structure from the collaboration standpoint is to deliver a very good experience to the Philips customers with our technology. So we work with Philips to work within their software that allows, when they're doing a POLAREAN sequence, to come up with the XenoView image, that it's very turnkey. The next part of that process was when they're using our chest coil to acquire the image, and I'll show you some of these images a little bit later, that it's also a turnkey process. And as I mentioned just a few minutes ago, we received FDA clearance for that specialized coil. And then just recently, last Friday, we signed a partnership with a company called Vita. They're out of the United States. They really specialize in workflow within radiology, specifically within pulmonology, and also specifically in CT. This collaboration with them allows us really to take our software and expand it into the networks in radiology, and also allows us to work together with them. They are very adept at working with pharma companies when pharma is requiring imaging as part of their drug development protocol. And together working with them, we can gain experience and also work together with them when pharma companies are looking to run protocols that require the XenoView technology. So one of the things that we've done is we've started successfully clinically imaging at 2 centers that we converted. First was in April of this year. No, it was June of this year. Sorry, it was May of this year, which was University of Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And the second one was the University of Missouri, which just happened at the end of June. We were also selected as a featured company at the ATS, which is very significant, which is a big meeting from Thoracic Society, which kind of shows the value of these people actually looking at the POLAREAN technology as sort of the up-and-coming way to do imaging, specifically functional imaging for the lung. So the next slide here is talking about the investment highlights. And I tried to be very specific and tried to think about, again, from my standpoint, how I would look at the company and how I've been thinking about it prior to me joining, and now after the, close to my 90th day here with the company. As it says here, we're very much poised to be the leader in functional MRI of the lung. Typically, when people think about functional MRI, they think about the brain. And this is something that we can really exploit, is to be able to see the full function. And I'll get into this with the technology with MRI in the lung. So the 4 specific things I see at investment highlights, obviously, that I looked at: a very large market, So our first market is really specifically in obstructive lung disease. That entire market, addressable market there, is about $2 billion in the United States with our technology. So it's a very large market with an unmet clinical need. The second is the functional imaging platform that we have. It really is a platform. It does more than just ventilation, which we have today, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But one of the really appealing things, I think, from my perspective and also from an investor perspective, is the ability to use this technology, which is non-invasive, it's radiation-free, but it also has a great business model. So, for example, the capital equipment is purchased by the hospital, and we then have the disposable component or the single-use component, which is recurring revenue, which is used for each patient. So the gas for each patient is used. We also have a dose bag, which is used for each patient. So it makes for a really nice, what we traditionally call in the United States, and maybe it's also called here in the UK, is a razor blade model. The idea is to get the razors out there, and then the razor blades will continue functioning. The other nice thing of this model is with the capital piece of equipment, it allows you always to have access into the hospital, which is great because your equipment is there and is also seen as a really important component when you're trying to establish relationships and build on relationships. Industry partnerships is another area, which is a really, I think, significant thing. We'll talk about a little bit more, but obviously in the pharma, med tech, and other areas allow for a really nice potential growth avenue for us. And the last component here is really a sizable market expansion. You can see it's about a $3 billion market plus, and it's a really high value and high needed area, which is really in the field of interstitial lung and pulmonary vascular disease, and using our technology in that space. So this is just a quick slide to show you how large the obstructive lung disease market is, 42 million. Just looking at the United States in particular here, where we have our FDA approval, where the main focus there is asthma, COPD, and cystic fibrosis. Obviously, there's a number of different things that we highlight here, and just looking at the cost and the burden, just in those first two, over $125 billion per year. The next one there is looking at cystic fibrosis, and I'll talk about cystic fibrosis in particular, the first patient that was done. But you can see here that I'm making a point that when a patient with cystic fibrosis has an issue, they have to actually go into the hospital, and typically that range is about $75,000 per visit. And we believe we can help prevent those, prevent that from happening to those patients with good monitoring with our technology. So just a little bit of a historical, from a diagnostic standpoint, looking at the lung itself, there are really there's several more than that, but there's really three specific things people think about or physicians think about. The first is spirometry. That's been used over roughly almost 100 years now, and it's great from giving a function standpoint, but unfortunately, it doesn't actually give you regional information. And it's also effort dependent, so it's very variable. Whether you're an older patient or a younger patient, it's very variable. The next one is scintigraphy. Scintigraphy is, again, it's been developed back in the 60s, and there's about 250,000 procedures that are done there, and it does give you some information about functional measure. But the problem here is that it's not radiation free, and it's not so great for the patients. A little bit of a hassle there as well. CT is the other thing, used quite a bit in the United States, obviously, and around the world. But really, what CT is doing is it's giving you structure. It's not giving you the function of the lung. It's giving you the structure itself, and obviously, it's also not a radiation-free process. Particularly when they're looking at younger patients that may have asthma or may have cystic fibrosis, it's much more difficult to get a longitudinal view of what's happening within the lungs. But again, it's not giving you any function. So this is a little bit of a busy slide, and we have our important safety information there on the right that we have to put onto the slide when we have this on our website. But what I really want you to focus on is the left side there. What we deliver to the hospital is that cylinder on the far left. Then we deliver also to the hospital the technology, which you can see in the middle too, which allows them to take that gas blend, that xenon gas, and allows you to polarize it or make it that it's viewable in an MRI machine. And the far right there is the dose bag that we also supply to the hospital that's used in a single use for each patient. So our technology is really, I would say, game-changing. The fact that this technology works the way it does is truly amazing. Literally, in a 10-second breath hold, you can get a tremendous amount of information about the lung function. Our first indication, again, allows us to see where the gas is going within the lungs. And the next step is actually to see where the gas goes beyond the lungs. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But typically, if someone's doing, say, an MRI of their brain or an MRI of their heart, you're typically looking at patients taking about 60 minutes in the MRI machine itself. Here, we can do slots of about 20 minutes to get the patient in. And again, when you're imaging the patient, it's all within about 10 seconds. So they inhale the gas that's been prepared, and then they do the scanning, and the patients have a vest on that's done, and then that information is then transferred over to our software. But if you look at the images there, you see up in the top left-hand corner there, the blue is the start of the installation. You can actually see the gas coming into the patient's lungs. On the right side, the MR is actually then taken, and you can actually see where the gas is. And again, the gas is going the same place where the oxygen is going. And at the same time, you would also take an MR of the lungs, a normal MR, and then combine the two. And you can see the deficit that's there up in the left portion of the bottom right image. Again, it's a non-invasive image, and it's a direct measure and visualization of nothing and you can actually see regions of the lung and understand what's happening there. So let's take a little bit of a look of some of the patients that we would be doing with our technology. So on the far left here, you can see the healthy patient. So the healthy patient, when the image comes in, the gas is going everywhere. So within our software, you can see everything that's green, or in this case, maybe in some cases where it's blue. The middle is an asthma patient. So they're getting obstruction. So the gas isn't getting everywhere. So in this case, you can see there's a lot of red and yellow, and they're only getting very low ventilation at about 70% of the lung. The same is true for a COPD patient, where you see about 66% of the lung is getting low ventilation. And here they would know that they need to make some type of either medication, or they would have to do some type of an intervention. Let's look at our first patient that was done in Cincinnati. It was a 19-year-old cystic fibrosis patient that, again, when they are using spirometry, what they do is they blow into a device that gathers how quickly they're blowing or how much force they're blowing in 1 second, and also that total volume. They then compare that data to sort of patient data that's been provided for many years ago, and they kind of give a percentage of what that would be for a patient. And here you can tell this patient blew about 111% of what's called predicted. But unfortunately, this patient also had was looked at with our technology, and they could see that a deficit of about 12% understanding our data. Again, because you're not getting very good data with spirometry, where you can get very good data with our technology. If you take a look down on the images there, you can see gaps of where the blue isn't. And unfortunately, with these cystic fibrosis patients, they never get that workability back into their lungs. So that's why it's very, very important to be able to monitor it and monitor correctly. Sort of the journey for a cystic fibrosis patient would be, once they get diagnosed, at some point they go up on a medication. these medications have been revolutionary, but actually make the patients feel very, very good. But at the same time, when they're on those medications, they're trying to do, specific other types of treatment combinations. One of those examples of sort of airway clearance techniques that they have to do is they have to wear that vest that you can see. And typically they're wearing that vest in the morning for about an hour, in the morning, and at night for about an hour as well. So it's quite a bit of time. And again, you got to remember these patients are typically very young and getting into adulthood and potentially going off to college. And it's very difficult to wear this vest. So if they're starting to feel better from the medication, they tend to be less compliant. And that was the case in this patient as well. So just because they're on the medication, they're feeling better, it doesn't mean that their lungs are actually doing well. And sometimes they can run into problems where there is actually a buildup of mucus in a certain place, and they can get an infection. And that leads them to having to go to a hospital. So ideally, what would happen in this case is that these patients are typically coming in once a quarter into the hospital. And at least we believe today, once a year, if they're able to actually get a scan and we could tell there's an issue beforehand, we can prevent these patients from having to actually go into the hospital. So I think the company over the years is really starting to build quite a bit of value. And I want to kind of point out three things that are really strong fundamentals within the company. So one of those things is the FDA experience that we've had. So of course, as you know, we got our FDA approval for the technology back in December. In addition to that, we've had 3 FDA clearances, along with the the production of the XenoView gas and that FDA approval, which we did a clinical trial for. We also got FDA clearance for our chest vest for the Siemens coil, for the Siemens MRI machine, as well as for the most recently for the Philips. And we also got the FDA clearance for the software. So we're really building up some very good experience within the FDA that really sets us up well for our next process through the FDA. Also on the right, there's been growing clinical validation. Over the past, say, 20 years, there's been so much work that's been done around the technology, and it's built up quite a bit, getting close to about 1,000 published manuscripts on the technology. In addition to that, our 2 clinical trials that we've done, and now with our real clinical work and looking at our post-marketing for our clinical work is going to be very, very important from a validation standpoint as we move past some of the early adopters into the next stage. We also have extensive patent coverage. You can see here we have over 20 patents that have been granted that give us at least another 10 years plus. So in my first sort of 90 days, I've been looking at the company and trying to put my perspective on it and trying to figure out where to focus. And I think that's really important when you have a small company. Sometimes these companies, from my experience, are trying to do everything. And the areas that we need to really focus on is really driving, I would say, the razor blades every time we get one of those razors out there. And that's really driving utilization at our newly established sites. I think we've been doing a great job right now at Cincinnati. Again, it's a children's hospital. We've been working very closely with the adult hospital, which is across the street, to allow a gateway of allowing those adult patients also to visit the children's hospital, to give them the opportunity to use the technology there, which is great. We are very much obviously working on expanding our user base. I'll talk about that in a little bit. I'll talk about establishing our reimbursement and the code in a little bit as well, but very, very key. And that really is focused right there on our beachhead. And our beachhead is focused on ventilation, which is really knowing where the gas goes in for into the lungs for obstructive lung disease. Sort of the next step there is developing key partnerships, and I'll talk about that as well, within pharma, med tech, and also opportunities within patient advocacy groups. And then really expansion of the FDA label. And I'll talk about this, and this may be new to some of you that are on the webinar today, which is really talking about gas exchange and getting that where we want to, what the real function of the lung is to move the oxygen from the lungs into the bloodstream. And the ability to know exactly how that is happening or how it isn't happening is really vital and important. So the first thing is the commercialization strategy. I think in general, the company has been doing an excellent job as it comes to commercialization. Unfortunately, there were some high expectations that were set up there, but from my perspective, the company has been doing all the right things there. What's probably may not be known is that, prior to FDA approval, we could not market the technology. We could not provide any quotations to any hospitals. When you're talking about equipment that's sort of on the list price of, over $500,000, to get that to be procured in a short amount of time in a hospital doesn't very much happen. It's very similar to, say, the situation that you'd have here at the NHS as well. But, we need to convert that research base, and we're very close to, converting additional centers, and we're working very strongly. Obviously, we've done the first two, but we know we need to continue to work and make it happen at these different other locations that we're working with. Obviously, driving utilization at any of these centers that we do is actually very key, and we're doing, I think, a good job at continuing to push that forward. And then really targeting on those top 50 pulmonary centers. We know where all those locations are. We've been actively speaking to a great number of these hospitals, and I think making good progress at a number of these hospitals. So from a reimbursement standpoint, and as I mentioned early on, we established a code. Now, the company, when originally looking to establish a code, looked at, what kind of code could the company get? On my first day on the job, I was on the meeting with what's called the CMS, which is the governmental agency that establishes the code, and trying to get further clarity. And prior to me joining, I think the company was very ambitious about getting the code. And I would say I was a bit skeptical, and I thought it would take a little bit more time, but I was pleasantly surprised not only how quickly it came through, but also at the level of the reimbursement that was established. So what you see on the bottom left there is that the code is established for payment for the gas, for the production of the Xenoview drug, and the delivery and the imaging of the drug when it's inside the patient. So that entire process there is roughly, I'd say, between $1,200 to $1,300 US. Okay, and that's first code. It was completed. The other two codes that you can see on the right are already existing codes. Those existing codes are for a normal MRI image of the chest cavity, and also for the quantification and interpretation of the data analysis, which happens afterwards within our software. So in the United States, we have what's called a Medicare system, which is similar to the NHS system here. But the difference is it's for individuals that are 65 years and older. It's a safety net for those adults that are a little bit older, 65 and older. For people that are younger than that age, it's private insurance. So the first step that we'll get is this code will become available on October 1st. And at that time, we will probably better understand what the coverage is. So the way coding works in the United States is that the first thing you need the code. That's the most important thing. The next part is coverage and then payment. We have the code. The next step is coverage. So early days, we'll know probably where we stand with Medicare. Again, Medicare is for the 65 years and older, on where they stand. In the United States, we have 7 different branches, which are called MACs, and they cover the entire 50 states in the US. So certain MACs, like one MAC may cover like 3 or 4 states. Other MACs may cover more than that number. And we need to understand, whether those MACs are going to cover that code right away. But there is a process for us to go out and start talking to these MACs And then the next step would be then looking at private insurance. So the nice thing about our technology is we're really working in the academic medical centers, where a lot of academic medical centers may have specific agreements with these private healthcare insurers, where they may just cover the code when it comes out. That's something that we'll have to see as we go through this. The other thing that's really nice about private insurance is that it's typically reimbursed at a higher rate, sometimes 1.5, sometimes even as high as 2 times higher than the Medicare rate, which would be phenomenal for the technology. At this roughly $1,750, you're looking at about 2 patients per week in order for the centers to break even. And this is a really great opportunity for centers to be able to get additional revenue sources, while also helping out a great number of patients that really need the help with the technology. This is just a quick slide to kind of talk about partnerships. I'm asked about this quite a bit, and we are actively talking to a number of pharma companies. We're actively talking to a number of med tech companies. And in this case, I've already talked a little bit about Vita, and I'll kind of step on that. But I think from a pharma perspective, I tried to cover this before. A lot of pharma companies are now obviously doing a lot of drug development, specifically in the lung area, where we can provide them much better information, again, regional information about what's happening with the patient's lung in that area. So quantitative and also imaging that they can see. So what this will help with our technology is there's very much a low variability on those measurements, where traditional like spirometry, there's high variability. So we can help them do less patients, which translates in less money that it takes for a drug trial to take place, as well as obviously less patients. So less money, less patients is all good, and we can get these drugs quicker to the patients through the FDA approval process. So just a little bit on the med tech side. So we established an agreement with Philips, which is great. It's a really good stamp of approval by one of the 3 large imaging companies. This doesn't prohibit us, obviously, working on a General Electric MRI machine nor a Siemens machine, but it gives us kind of really great access to to Philips customers, and we're working very thoroughly with them. In fact, we have in October seems like it's going to be a very busy month for us with a number of things, but we're working together in getting in front for the first time of the entire Philips sales team to really educate them on the technology, which should be very easy for them to understand because they understand MR quite well, but we'll be talking to them specifically about pulmonology. So that'd be a great thing. And I touched on a little bit earlier, but this is a great advancement for us with this partnership together with Vita. You can see a little bit of a graphic there. They're really, I would say, an AI company. They have a lot of expertise, within radiology and how to deal with data and move data around. The other thing that they're quite good and adept at is they're really great at running trials. So, for instance, when we're running our gas exchange trial in the future, we look forward to partner with them and make it a very quick and simple process. So expansion of the U.S. FDA labeling, which I think is a very significant thing for the company in the next stage of this expansion. So over 3 million people in the United States every year walk into a GP's office and they ask the same question: why am I short of breath? Why am I short of breath? And the thing is it's a very difficult question to kind of resolve with the current technologies that's in place. It's either not very good, or you can't really understand the lung function and what's happening in specific areas of the lung, or maybe it's a problem with someone's heart, or maybe it's a contribution of both issues, a heart problem as well as a lung problem. So this is a very high valued area that all the physicians that I spoke to when I did my tour around talking to our existing research customers as well as other customers we're looking to bring on. It's a very high valued area, and we're really excited about what we can offer in this area. So if we look at the lung today, there are really three compartments. If you think of where our FDA approval today, it's really in the airspace. And that's why we're really focused there on obstructive lung, because we're really concerned about where the air is getting to and where it's not getting to. And we can see where that is getting, with our current FDA approval. The next step is really to look at this gas exchange. The gas goes from the lung in through a membrane into the bloodstream. Think of it like grapes. There are about 3 to say 400 million grapes that are called alveoli in your lung. That's sort of the end of the branches of the lung, of these small airways. And the oxygen is getting there, it's getting to the grape, and then it's being transmitted from the grape into the bloodstream, and then it's pumped back into the heart, and then out to that enriched oxygen is then being pumped out to the rest of the body. So you can see that with our technology, we can actually understand how much of the gas is getting into the membrane, how much is getting into the red blood cells. Furthermore, we can also see the hemodynamics of the blood in the areas of the capillaries. So we can understand how well that blood is actually getting pushed into the lungs and getting pushed out, to understand something called pulmonary hypertension. There are really 5 different areas of pulmonary hypertension, and we can be very specific in giving key information. And if I would say that the money slide is this one, this is really an important slide and really comes down to what the value of our technology is. It is a very busy slide, but I can tell you there's a lot of technology there in the middle that already exists today that is not as good as what we can provide all on the right-hand slide. All on the right-hand side, we can answer all this information in about 10 seconds. So look at it. We can look at the whole lung function. We can look at regional lung function. We can understand what's happening in the smallest parts of the airway. We can look at the gas exchange and understand what's happening in the gas exchange. And we can also understand what's happening in the capillary hemodynamics. Some of these things in the middle here, this existing technology, is, like I said, is very variable. So it's hard to really kind of decipher what's happening. It's also maybe intrusive. For example, on the bottom there, you can see RHC. That's a right heart catheterization that you need to put in. It's an invasive procedure into a patient. They probably try to better understand what's happening with pulmonary hypertension in this case. Or it causes radiation, right? So, whether it's scintigraphy, X-ray, or CT, there's radiation effects. And again, we can do everything and provide a comprehensive, quantitative, and regional lung function really in one breath hold. So I'm going to turn it over to Chuck to quickly talk about financials. I'll wrap it up, and then I'll turn it over to the Q&A process.
Thanks, Chris. Just very quickly on the finances, during fiscal year 2022, we were 100% focused on obtaining FDA approval. So all of our expenditures were geared towards those endeavors. As we got FDA approval at the end of last year, this year, in the first half of the year, our expenditures were kind of evenly divided between launching the product, having the commercial team try really hard to launch the product. And then also we had a long list of post-approval FDA requirements that we had to take care of. We have now significantly reduced our expenses going forward as we're trying to effectively stretch our cash runway as long as we possibly can. We finished June with a little less than $10 million in the bank that will safely fund the company through June of next year. And again, our goal is to accomplish as many commercial and possibly corporate partnering milestones that will support a future financing at the right time.
Okay.
Yep. Good.
All right. So just in general, these are kind of the highlights that are kind of sum up the presentation. We'll turn it over to the QAs. So I can't, it's sometimes hard to express through these webinars the excitement that I have for being at Polarian with this amazing technology and what we can provide. We're looking at a really significant unmet need with this obstructive lung disease, what we have today, which what I call is our beachhead. And then just the ability that we have from an investment standpoint of knowing that we have a great platform to be able to do a number of things in the lung. In addition to that, with the business model, by having the capital combined together with a single use consumable for each patient is just a phenomenal model. The ability to do partnerships, I think, are going to be very important. I'm asked that quite a bit all the time, where we lead that. It takes time to develop these partnerships. I think that the company did an excellent job in this first stage with Philips. We then, did this recent one with Vida, and there are definitely more partnerships to come into the future. I think everybody kind of recognizes sort of the value that we bring to the table by being able to provide lung function and how that can help them either from a pharmaceutical side or even med tech, beyond just the imaging companies itself. And then this last thing I described to you, and I'm not sure, I was meeting with a number of investors this week and trying to educate or maybe re-educate sort of the high value need of this sizable market, which is both looking at pulmonary with the gas exchange as well as cardiopulmonary in answering that issues of what's happening with the hemodynamics of, obviously the blood flow through the capillaries in the lung. So it's obviously a very, very exciting time. So I want to turn it over now to look at some questions. We try to compile as many questions as we could in order to give some information. So we did our best job of trying to compile them in different fashions. I think the first one we want to look at is specifically in the financing side. So what I'll do is I'll read these questions here, and these first couple, I think, Chuck, it would be okay if you'd answer these first couple.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so let's see. So the first one, from a financing perspective, can you summarize the company's capital needs and the current runway? I think you kind of talked about that, but maybe just talk about it again.
Yeah, no, just a reminder, the current cash funds the company safely through Q2 of 2024. The company will need additional capital to accelerate, the adoption of the technology and drive sales, and then fund the development of the really high value gas exchange indications. We're thinking about the right time to seek additional capital, and we're going to try to make sure that we accomplish some good milestones in advance of going out to raise additional capital.
All right, great. Thanks, Chuck. This next one looks like it's for you as well. So what alternative sources of funding are you pursuing for replacing?
We, as Chris talked about, strategic partners are very important to the company. We believe they can play an important role in the development and funding of the company's technology. We're in the early stages of discussions with these various pharmaceutical companies, pulmonary disease foundations, MRI companies about partnering with Polarian. As you may be aware, these things take some time, and we're spending the time upfront to work on these, but the timing is really difficult to predict to predict if and when it will be completed.
Okay. Some of these questions look like they're revolved around commercialization, so I'll just read this one here. What is the current process in converting research-based customers to commercial ones? So this is one I've been asked quite a bit. Obviously, we've converted 2 of our prominent research sites to date. We've been working with these customers for a long time, right? And I think at the same time, they were expecting also that we would have our FDA approval sooner than we got it. So, but now it's really, we're working with these, customers to really convert them and get them to clinical. Each center has its own thing, and I want to make sure that everybody watching this today really understands there is so much excitement from the clinician base. Every one of these centers wants the technology yesterday. They really do. They see the value in it. I'm asked, is the value being transmitted? Do they see that there's a need here? there's a huge unmet need, right? That's one of the main reasons I joined the company. I did quite a bit of diligence on it. I spoke to these customers before I joined. And there's a certain amount, I would say, aggravation with these clinicians, as are with our investors, that some of these have not converted. But we're working, very diligently with the hospitals and around the logistics. It's really with the administration and trying to get these centers converted. But we're confident we will continue to convert a number of these sites over time. We have a couple that are, I would say, in the late stages, and we're working really, really diligently with those customers. In some cases, POLAREAN is doing the work of kind of bringing the administration together with the clinicians. In some cases, the administration is looking for different financing options, and we've been providing those to help kind of knock down each roadblock that we come up against. But I can assure you that the company is working very, very diligently on making that happen. All right, the next question here is, if the technology is so good, why has the uptake been so slow? So I think, as I just mentioned, the physician excitement for the product is there. Unfortunately, it's just slower than expected. I will say that, and I mentioned earlier in the presentation, from my perspective and my experience of doing capital equipment, especially in a new category area, there is an amount of work that needs to be done with administration to kind of bring them up to speed. We're talking about market development here. A lot of times it's just educating the administration on who POLAREAN is, what we're about, what the technology is, what the reimbursement is. And now by having that code, it really kind of changes quite a bit from us. Really, that was a little bit of a misnomer, not having that code and trying to give, saying that we've applied for the code. We know the code will take time. And now having that pricing and what the pricing will be should kind of alleviate some of the questions in some of the centers. Our first center, Cincinnati, they went into it blind without the code, knowing that they wanted to be very aggressive and be on the front lines. And we're working really closely with these other academic medical centers to get that to happen. But again, from my perspective, I would say that I'm not surprised at how long it's taking this to get through administration. This is just a process. In the 90s, I spent quite a bit of time working in Europe and also in the UK, and I'm very familiar of working, at least in those days, working through NHS and what that kind of took. But we're actively addressing, and we're working with each one of these places. And as I mentioned, whether it's bringing meetings together or providing financing options or being further flexible in different areas, I think it's obviously a really important thing. But again, from my perspective, early results of this type of medical imaging, it's first of its kind, is just not very different from my past experiences. All right, so what was the feedback then from the clinicians since the FDA approval in new sites and existing ones? We've received really, really highly positive responses from the physicians. Like I said, both the existing and the potential sites. I've been around to these potential sites, been talking to them directly. We've been setting up meetings with them. They're really excited about it. I think one of the things that they're also really excited about from a POLAREAN perspective is this gas exchange and what that can do. We have several of these sites, ones that we've been working for a long time with. May have heard the word Duke before. We're down in North Carolina. We have a good arrangement with Duke. We've done a lot of work together with them and a lot of partnerships with them. The clinicians there are really excited about establishing this technology and getting it going, and really see a high value. And we're going to drive quite a bit of utilization when we convert that center, as well as a few others that I'm not mentioning here. Are you happy with the pace of commercialization? So again, it's around the same thing of the company's products. Well, I would say, the company, obviously, we're disappointed that the commercialization has gone more slower than anticipated. But again, I'm just kind of repeating myself again here. But from my previous experience, I would have seen this happening. It just takes time for sort of this first technology to get it to launch. I would be more concerned, as some of the people I've been getting questions from, if the clinicians weren't really eager for the technology, and that's definitely not the case. And I think that as we've talked about quite a bit, the reimbursement code, while we don't know what the coverage is today, we definitely know that we have a code. The physicians know we have a code. The hospitals know we have a code. It's a really good value when you're looking at it. And then, working with those academic medical centers, we're going to push to, get those codes covered, both on the Medicare, which is the 65 and older, as well as the private pay. What was the company doing from the rejection of the first FDA submission to the acceptance over a year later? Chuck, do you want to take that?
Yeah, happy to. During the period from the time the company received the complete response letter from the FDA until we got FDA approval, the company was 100% focused on resolving the FDA questions and obtaining approval. And during that period, until we got FDA approval, we were strictly prohibited from marketing the products.
Okay. And I think that's an important point, just prohibited. I mentioned this a number of times in talking to a number of investors while I've been in the UK this week. So in the US, not unsimilar to other places in the world, you have a budgeting process for capital equipment. And it really doesn't matter whether the technology is $20,000 or $1 million. It goes through the same exact process. So there's a budgeting process that we all do in our lives as well. Maybe looking at doing an expansion in the house or redoing a bathroom. You go through a process and you set your capital process for the year. And it's very untypical to go and do something outside of that process. Now, sometimes in my experience, in the past 30 years, we've been able to get hospitals to acquire medical equipment off budgeting process, and it does happen. And in fact, it's happening with the first conversion sites that we've done, and I think it will happen a bit more as well. But we were not able to provide any quotations or any guidance in pricing or any marketing material to any of these centers until the beginning of this year. And a lot of these centers either have January to December, or they'll have July to June, physical cycles. So it's hard to get that out of range. So I think it's important to understand that you have to go through that capital cycle process. It's just not ready. It's go here. Let's acquire the equipment. Probably maybe what's misunderstood as well. We do have these research centers. Some of these research centers are a little bit easier to convert to clinical. Some of them, however, need an upgraded version of their system that requires some capital, not the full capital, but does require capital in order for them to convert to clinical. So again, we're asking for some of these centers, and we've been able to do it at Cincinnati and at Missouri, off cycle to get that to happen. Okay, are you looking at commercialization beyond North America? So I was just talking about international, i.e. Middle East, UK, and Europe. Again, as I mentioned early on, one of the things I'm trying to bring to the company is focus, right? We need to be laser focused, and we're laser focused on those 5 pillars that I described to you earlier. So we believe that, obviously in early stages as we are today, it's extremely important to focus. And right now, the high value is the U.S. market. Obviously, with the FDA approval, with the code now that's there, I think that's probably the right call. I think everybody would agree for that. And obviously, we're focused on our resources doing that. I think obviously there's a good potential once we have good market adoption in the U.S. I think it would be a good opportunity to explore the OUS market or the outside U.S. markets as well. I've always, having run a number of companies and been involved with a number of companies over the last 30 years, I've had a lot of experience in the international markets, or in my case, the outside of the U.S. markets. And sometimes these can be better done, I think, with an opportunities of looking at partners outside the United States, which is obviously a good opportunity. And I would say that we've had I've had personally some early discussions about that as well. Can you tell us how well the future development is progressing? The company mentioned in the last presentation that existing research into the alveolar gas exchange could be used to expand the use of the polarizers in these high-value diseases. And if you could expand on this to explain the future uses in hemodynamics and what is being done with regards to discussions with the FDA and partners to achieve this. Okay, that's a very long question. Okay, so as I mentioned, obviously I spent a little bit of time kind of explaining this is an incredible opportunity to be able to look at the true lung function, which is where the oxygen is passing into the bloodstream for a number of different indications, so diseases there, like idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, in order to actually determine whether the patient has that disease and if a medication is working or not working. There are a bunch of different medications out there on the market. This is unfortunately, it's a deadly disease. I know about this disease quite well because I had a family member very close to me that died from this disease about a decade ago. But it's like, where we can provide so much value to the clinicians in knowing that the drug is working or not working is really vital. These drugs are very expensive, and it's sometimes these patients go through a tremendous amount of side effects. So the ability to give this information would be really, really important. So the value is really there. So we think that, we can, with our technology, as I described to you, really revolutionize pulmonary and cardiopulmonary diagnosis. And it could provide, I think, the most long-term shareholder value. So there's a lot of value to unlock in this gas exchange. So research continues to be performed in clinical studies today. Duke is one of the kind of the premier leaders that has been looking at this for many of these interstitial or pulmonary vascular diseases. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we were granted a formal Type B meeting in October where we're going to seek guidance to really understand what it looks like to us for us to gain approval on that indication. And I believe, from my medical device background, which is really, I would say, much more frugal management style, and we're looking at all expenses with Chuck, and we want to be very specific, but I want to make sure we understand exactly how we will run this trial. And I believe we can run this trial at a less expensive than originally intended, or that the company believed we could do it for. And I've run a number of clinical trials, and some actually in the lung in my past. Is there a financial benefit for hospitals to adopt this technology? I think that should be clear now. We've talked about the code. We talked about the benefit for the patients at 65 and older, and the younger patients. If you're looking at those younger patients and getting them up on private pay, for the potential for the hospital to get 1.5 to potentially 2 times that value would even reduce the number of patients that they need to do in order to break even. But I would say that 2 patients a week is definitely doable. There's a lot of patients out there that would require this technology. What is the cost-benefit analysis for insurance companies? How does POLAREAN technology reduce the need for these procedures? Obviously, we believe that a XenoView scan can detect lung disease earlier and more accurately than current diagnostics. And this obviously should enable hospitals to streamline the diagnosis process and lead to better treatments of patients, including shortening, or in the case I mentioned in the CF patient, preventing hospital stays, and obviously more effective use of therapeutics. But it also might lead to better understanding of if someone has lung cancer, for example, and they need to be treated with radiation, where can you bring the radiation in? You don't want to bring the radiation into the lung and attack the tumor in a good area of the lung where it's actually allowing good ventilation and good gas exchange. You may look at other areas of the lung which are not performing that well. So there are a whole host of applications. We don't have enough time to get into all those today, but a whole number of different applications that can happen. So just quickly, we're running up against our time. I'll try to answer one or two more and then call it a day. But there's one here about partnerships. What are the benefits of your partnership with Philips? I think I talked about this quite a bit, but really the collaborations, I think, facilitates us to be able to work together jointly to provide a really great experience for the customer. And then from the Polarian side is the ability to get access. And I look at it as reducing our cost. Philips is obviously a one of these large imaging companies that gives us really good access to their current customers and potentially more. When you think about even global, you could think about potential partnerships with one of these imaging companies outside there. We have regular meetings with Philips today to look and identify and interact with their customers or potential new customers or customers they're looking to keep. And I think it's an important point, and we're really excited to get in front of the entire sales force in October. So let's see. The last question here I'll look at is, why have you withdrawn the company's prior targets? Really great question. I don't think we've addressed that here on the call. So one of my first objectives here as the new CEO has been to really evaluate the commercial plan, the whole company, and try to put some structure and focus into it. And I believe we've made some good progress at refining those key pillars in my first 80 days with the company. And I've experienced in my previous megatech companies early stages of capital equipment, and they're very difficult to predict. It's really difficult to predict in the early days with hospital administrations and budgets. And I thought it was very prudent from my standpoint to withdraw the commercial guidance, or what we gave a guidance out there until we can get better visibility. This was this target that was out there was provided by previous management. And whilst I believe we can achieve commercial progress, I firmly believe that in the time frame, through I guess it was February 2025. I think just because of the lumpiness in the sales of this type of equipment, I just don't feel comfortable in this standpoint committing to those targets that were set up. But I look forward to providing guidance at the appropriate time as I've become more comfortable exactly where we're going. Okay, so I think there were a few other questions, but we kind of hit our time limit here.
Perfect.
Yeah, check it over.
Chris, Chuck, thank you very much for that. As you mentioned, I think you've addressed those questions you can from investors given the time. And of course, the company will review all the questions submitted today and will publish those responses on the Investor Meet Company platform. But just before redirecting investors, provide you with their feedback, which is particularly important to the company. Chris, could I just ask you for a few closing comments?
Yeah, I think you said it. One of the things that I've been asked about quite a bit was, providing, more updates and regular updates, and I look forward to doing that. I think we could provide more frequent but appropriate updates to the market going forward. But in the meantime, I want to thank all the investors and analysts and other participants for your interest in Polarian and our amazing technology. All the employees and I are really excited about delivering this amazing technology really for mankind and what it does. And I think we're looking forward to do that. So with that, please enjoy the rest of your day.
Chris, Chuck, thank you once again for updating investors today. Could I please ask investors not to close the session, as you'll now be automatically redirected to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of POLAREAN Imaging PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation, and good morning to you all.